Will the Iran war escalate, or can a settlement be reached? Tonight, three leading experts join us to break down what we know and what comes next. Hello, I'm Jim Falk, host of the forum, where each week we explore timely political, social, and cultural issues through thoughtful conversation. Tonight, the forum is being simulcast with WorldNow. That's a program hosted by the World Affairs Council of Connecticut in partnership with the World Affairs Councils of America and councils across the United States. Thank you for your support. Joining our discussion are three experts with considerable, and I might say they may feel that they have too much experience with Iran. Here with me in the KSFR studio on the campus of the Santa Fe Community College is Ambassador Deborah Jones. She retired from the State Department with the rank of Career Ambassador and served in multiple posts in the Middle East, including as U.S. Ambassador to Kuwait in Libya, and currently she chairs the Board of Emeritus. Also with us via Zoom is Beth, who held senior positions at the CIA, including Deputy Director of National Intelligence, and she served as President Trump's daily intelligence briefer during his first term, and she's now a national security contributor for CNN. Stephen Cook is the Senior Fellow for Middle East and Africa at the Council on Foreign Relations. He's the author of several books, including his most recent, I think you can even see the poster behind him, The End of Ambition, America's Past, Present, and Future in the Middle East. I think all of you will agree this is quite a panel. Before we get started, let me just remind you that if you're joining via Zoom, please submit your questions in the Q&A function, not in the chat, because I really can only look at one box at a time. And if you're streaming live on ksfr.org, you can email your questions to me, forum@ksfr.org. Thanks again for being with us. And I tell you, I didn't really know what the first question should be until about an hour or so ago because there have been so many changes. But here's the one that I thought we'd go with first, and that's to Ambassador Jones. Was this a war of choice or a war of necessity?
Probably depends on who you ask. I would say it's a war of choice. We have been saying since at least 1994, when I was doing public relations at the State Department, that Iran would have a nuclear capability within 2 weeks. And indeed, it depends on how you describe or define nuclear capability, but also how you define intent. And I think the shifting priorities we've heard from the president about why we're in this or the reasons for being in it, and the fact that when Iran has unleashed its most powerful weapon, it happens to be something that we'd all talked about for years, which is the blockade, or not the closing per se, but the circumvention, the constriction of the Strait of Hormuz, which is now, I think, the president's top priority in dealing with, as opposed to the rest of the, he would also like to get the nuclear dust, quote unquote, et cetera. But I think the Strait has become the single most important issue right now for him.
You know, I can't wait until Maggie Hammerman's book comes out, the one that I think it's going to be released in June with Jonathan Swan, talking about how President Trump reached this decision. Stephen, you're a historian. Can you think of other time, perhaps except when Churchill slept and dined and drank at the White House, when a head of government had as much influence? And, I guess there was not the sort of the skiff that we have now, but it really seems quite amazing that Netanyahu had that type of access and influence.
I am actually a political scientist, but if you ask me if I went back in time, would I do it? Would I be a political scientist or would I be a historian? I'd say I'd be a historian. So I'll answer your question faithfully, Jim. Look, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu has been afforded opportunities that he has not had with other presidents because this is a norm-breaking president. Why does Jared Kushner get to do all the things he gets to do, but he doesn't have a security clearance? Why do the Trump children make billions of dollars off of the Trump presidency? Why is his family worth $2 billion more than it was last January? So there's a whole host of things, but I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu clearly has had ample opportunity to make the case for a war on Iran, and the president ultimately made the decision to go for it. There's a reason why 5 or 6 other presidents have said no. They looked at the war plans. They said this is not necessarily going to end well for us. And this president, coming off of what he termed the success of Operation Midnight Hammer, which was the American airstrikes on 3 of Iran's nuclear facilities last June, and then the Venezuela operation, in which the U.S. military snatched the leader of another country without any casualties, any injuries on the part of the U.S., clearly believed that this would be something easy, and that he would find the Persian analog to Delcy Rodriguez, completely misreading, not understanding what Iran is about. But let me say, there's been a lot that's been said about Prime Minister Netanyahu here. This is the Israelis have for years heard that the Iranians want to destroy Israel. The Iranians have raised armies on their borders. Any Israeli prime minister, not just Netanyahu, would go to the United States and say, we have this terrible security problem. Please help us with it. And they have. But they have said, American presidents have said, we'll have to deal with it in another way. This president decided he would go for it.
Beth, you have had such a distinguished career analyzing and thinking about how to read a country's intentions or a leader's intentions. What did we get wrong here? Or perhaps I should say, what did President Trump and his closest advisors get wrong?
I think that this is absolutely a key point. There are a lot of assumptions that this administration has made, and in particular that President Trump has made about the adversary. And I have to say, President Trump is not the first president to misread the adversary, to underestimate the adversary, and to overestimate the ability of our, far superior military to have, just a complete victory, a total victory, as the president has termed it. But in fact, the lesser adversary, the third world country, whatever it is, has somehow in the end managed to survive. And, we had this in Vietnam, we had this in Afghanistan, we've had this with ISIS, other adversaries over time. And I think that the president went into this thinking, as exactly as Stephen said, that this was going to be a Venezuela redux. And in fact, he said it again today, that this was just like Venezuela, but on a different scale. But it's not. It's not like Venezuela. And the counterparts are not, there hasn't been regime change. There hasn't been regime change in Venezuela either, but there's a compliant, leader. You're not going to get a compliant leader out of this revolutionary, resistance-based, ideological, religious community, that cohort that runs Iran. And misunderstanding that is putting us into I think, a continuously bad situation vis-a-vis Iran, because we just don't understand that the pressure tactics that we use or the threats that we use are not going to result in, kind of what we would expect from a normal country.
I'm reading a book right now that just was published by Matthew Fox, and he is a historian, and he has a number of photos from the first Gulf War. And you see President George H.W. Bush surrounded by some of the distinguished people that we remember who served as advisors, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State. And I wonder, Ambassador, the hollowing out that we have seen at the State Department, and even more recently at the Pentagon, perhaps, what impact has that had on how this decision was made and what we're seeing every day?
Right. Well, it certainly has, but I would also say the nature of the president himself, who is a classic entrepreneur. And if you look at the Myers-Briggs models, he's a P off the charts, which means that he has big ideas, and he shifts and he changes them all the time. And I don't think he likes hearing people say to him that can't be done. And we do have a fabulous military. We have the best military in the world, bar none. What the military gets frustrated by, even in normal times, is they say, you people at state, or you people at, fill in the blank, the agency or wherever, you like to nuance everything to a fault. Well, you can't nuance a missile. It's either launched or it's not. And I think it's the military who's being pulled and pushed back and forth. But I also think in this case, too, they would have, if he had been willing to listen, which, again, I'm not sure he would be, because I think he was really sold on this solution or this quick hit that would earn him all kinds of accolades and take care of it.
And also, what information is he getting?
Well, that's the big question, too. Who's prepared to say to him no, yes, or give him a kind of a realistic view of what's happening? And I suspect that there are very few people who are willing to, those who he listens to. Yeah, I gathered that he's just getting the brief now of the attacks. It's kind of like a video game every morning where he's getting to see, how great our military is, but without really paying attention to the other sides of it. For example, the likelihood and reality that Iran would resort, like a lot of weaker states, to this kind of horizontal escalation, which gives them leverage over other people who are allied with us, as opposed to falling apart. And also, the complex things, which I don't think he'd ever even pay attention to, is like the mosaic system of their leadership situation following Iraq, etc.
Stephen, how do you see the different goals that the United States and Israel had at the beginning of the war compared to what they may be now?
I think that the president, on the first day, that first morning, he released a video at 2 a.m. He articulated fairly concrete goals for the United States, which included regime change, ending the nuclear program, ending the ballistic missile threat, sinking the Iranian Navy. But the president, being who he is, has since kind of bobbed and weaved between goals. He's always looking to keep his options open. He's looking for the leverage, the advantage that he has. So we have seen less clear articulation of what our ultimate goal is as the weeks have gone on. And I think that basically where he decides to end, he will say, these were our goals, and they have been met. I mean, he doesn't talk about regime change because he keeps saying the regime has changed, when so obviously it has not. And it seems to me what he's trying to do is create a narrative that many people will believe, but it's just very, very hard to convince people that a regime has changed, and for the better, when the hardest of the hard line are now the ones who are in charge in Iran. As far as Israel goes, I mean, there's really been an unprecedented partnership here between the United States and Israel militarily. I think, though, that there was a somewhat different set of military targets and a division of labor that suggested a slightly different strategic goal here. The Israelis' goal was really to decapitate the leadership, and then some, in order to make it difficult for Iran to operate, and then to hammer Iran's military, its military production facilities, and even its dual-use economic facilities, just to bring this regime to its knees. And that has been a very, very clear goal. I mean, what's been interesting about this, if you don't mind for a second, is that the Israelis have had very clear goals, the Iranians have had very clear goals to survive, and the United States' goals have been variable and unclear, and the president, as I said, has bobbed and weaved in between them. But at this point, the Israelis have come to recognize that their analysis of the situation was not correct, and that they have given up on the idea of regime change. Of course, it may come. You had protests in Iran, months after the 12-day war and Operation Midnight Hammer. That may still yet happen, but the idea that you could bring this regime down by decapitating it, I think, was a miscalculation on the part of the Israelis, and they come out of this with tactical victories, but as is often the case with the Israelis, unable to turn those tactical gains into strategic change that they desire.
We have several questions about regime change, and who is really running Iran right now? And we saw from the negotiations that recently occurred in Pakistan that perhaps the Iranians went a little bit too far, and then they were pulled back by the RGC. I mean, that seems to be the key question right now. And Stephen, when you mention about decapitation, it seems to me that a mistake that was made by the Israelis is that the decapitation was so deep that they really did eliminate leaders that might have stepped in, perhaps in a more moderate position. But Beth, you probably have a really keen sense of who is running the country.
I don't think any of us do. And I think that that is the humility that we should have about the situation going on. Stephen and I were talking about this earlier today, and I encourage him to jump in and steer in the way he wants to on this. But I do feel like that there has been an overstatement of this kind of divide in Iran between the moderate political leaders and the hardline IRGC. I mean, I just don't remember a time when when the political class in Iran actually ran it. I mean, the IRGC has been ascendant for quite some time, in my view, and I think the IRGC is in charge now. And I am questioning. I mean, you can hear Iranians, people who are very connected. Some will say, Ghalibaf is not part of that. Others will say that Ghalibaf is absolutely still connected to the IRGC. I mean, that's where he comes from. I don't know the answer to that, but I think the salient question here is there always have been divisions in Iran. There always has been infighting. It's just part of the culture. The question is who adjudicates the final determination. In the past, it was the supreme leader. The question now is whether the new Khamenei, the new supreme leader, is actually adjudicating things, or maybe whether it's the new head of the IRGC, who is among the hardest of the hardest hard lines. And so, but I think that the idea that there's some moderates that we are doing deals with, I kind of just don't buy that. I think that in the end, it is the IRGC who makes the rules. And maybe Aragachi got ahead of himself a little bit, but he's also an easy fall guy. So I don't know. Over to others to comment.
I think that's right. I align with Beth on this. I think, American policy towards Iran has been hampered by a series of pretty bad assumptions. And one of the bad assumptions is the fact that there are moderates who can carry the day as opposed to hardliners, when in fact those so-called moderates are really either don't have political power or they are putting a nicer face on the hardliners. I think here of Javad Zarif, the foreign minister, who was thought of as a moderate, but when you dig down deep into it, he really never affected policy in a way that would have moderated the Iranian approach. And people might look to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, otherwise known as the Iran nuclear deal. But it strikes me that the Iranians didn't want a better relationship with the United States. They wanted sanctions relief, and that's what they got out of the deal. But we assumed that moderates wanted a better relationship with the United States, and I just don't think that that was the case. And I think whether the Israelis killed lots of people or not, I think we'd be seeing a very similar kind of response from whoever's left in Iran. And Ghalibaf and Vahidi and these guys are IRGC guys, and they are the ones who are in charge, just like the people who were previously in charge were IRGC guys. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was killed in the opening round of the conflict, his religious credentials were significantly less than the original Ayatollah Khomeini. He was really propped up for many, many years by the IRGC.
Let's take a look at in the neighborhood a bit. We talked about Prime Minister Netanyahu's influence, but I read that MBS was really encouraging President Trump to take action. Perhaps they're having buyer's remorse, Ambassador?
There's still a lot of back and forth on that story and what was actually said. I do agree with both of you that it's not that Iran wants great relations to be friendly with the United States per se, but they did have a status quo in the Gulf that has been very upset for the Gulfies as well. And it's very difficult for people in the Gulf to speak frankly right now, because the fact is their coin and trade is the security situation that they had there and the potential for growth and a tax-free environment. And it's like a confidence game that has been kind of upended with this now. And again, I think one of the, the question is, I think one approach to Iran and the region was to say have Israel have these relationships with the Gulf states so that in a way it would start weaving everything in, and prevent somehow, whether that was a fantasy or not, to normalize situations gradually. But the reality is that over the years, and certainly when I was in Kuwait, the Kuwaitis had very practical functioning relationships with the Iranians. All of the governments in the Gulf have gone back and forth on this. They've had their moments of peak, but in fact, they're neighbors. They have to live with them. And what I have heard from my friends or from contacts there, even though this is not said publicly, they said they're angry with us and Israel for disrupting the kind of false sense of security, if it was false or not. And they're also furious with Iran for violating their sovereignty by telling them they cannot have defensive relationships with the United States, because the bases that are in these places were defensive bases, essentially for them, and that's how they saw them. That's what they're saying. But now you have a situation where Iran, and again, I think any analyst who's followed any wars could have said this is what Iran was going to do. And in fact, people had said this. They will go after these people. They will go to weaken them. They will try to make them see the error of their ways of having relationships under the Abraham Accords or whatever it would be. They're going to show them that they're not stable without a relationship with Iran, that they can't be safe, and that they're very dependent. And again, this choke point on the Gulf gives the Iranians right now a tremendous power that they didn't have before, that they hadn't been exercising before. So I think it is plausible that someone would say, now that you've started this, please finish it, because it is a little bit. And I've said to some people with the president in this whole war and the Gulf or the Strait of Hormuz, it's a little bit reminiscent of the old Fuller Brush man who would come door to door when we were growing up and come in, knock in, put dirt on your carpet. Then bring out his machine to wipe, to vacuum it up and let you pay for it because, he's showing you how well that machine can vacuum it up afterwards. But there was no problem in the first place, immediate problem. They were working things out. The Saudis had just had the thing. Would they like to see Iran in a position where they can't do these things, where they can't squeeze the strait, where they can't? I don't think the Iranians would have ever attacked. The drone strikes are a little bit different. I think this is a long discussion, but yes, they would. Now they say, now that you got us into this, how are we going to get out of this so that we get back to some kind of normalcy? Because this is where we live. This is where we live and breathe. We're not surrounded by two big oceans like y'all are. And
it strikes me as dangerous that we have our vice president negotiating because you're already at such a high level. Typically, negotiations like this, I would think, Ambassador and Beth and Steve would be at a lower level, at the technical level.
Yeah.
And I saw a picture where the Iranians were walking into the negotiations and it looked like a football team. There were a lot of people, and the U.S. didn't look like there was very many people. How serious is that? And Beth, from what you're hearing, are there technical people really in the know-how that are backing up the vice president and Mr. Kushner and Mr. Witkoff?
Well, I have no inside information, but I did read and from reputable sources that there were more technical people involved in this round. There was Rafael Grossi, the Director General of IEEA, who was involved in part of the previous round in Geneva. But I think that there is more of that than there was in the original rounds between Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner. And so I think that they're learning from that. I think J.D. Vance has, his own national security advisor and deputy national security advisor who are have serious foreign policy credentials. Whether you agree with them or not is kind of irrelevant, but they're not from a different business, former State Department people. So, they know how things work. So I think that actually there is more going on there. The fact that the Iranians brought 70 to 90 people on their delegation I mean, part of that is like, who wouldn't want to get out of Tehran right now? I mean, sign me up. I want to go shopping and, like eat food and have electricity. So not that Islamabad always has electricity, but,
I was
you
going to
know,
say,
it's
Yeah,
still,
it's not like it was Paris, but
at the hotel there. I'm sure it's just quite lovely. Anyway, I digress, but I mean, I think that there are serious negotiations going on from the United States, a little bit more informed. But this is the thing, the way that the Trump administration it conducts foreign policy is literally upside down. It's 180 what normally happens in negotiations, where you have like a bottom up thing and you have, people working for weeks and weeks. And in the case of JCPOA, literally years, right, to come up with and go through all of that. And the reason that the Trump administration doesn't do that is not because they're dumb, it's because they don't think that that's worthwhile. It's because literally they reject the model that experts lend something to the equation that they couldn't get to themselves. And so they want to start with principles. And so that's why, they're approaching it this way and that what the best case scenario here is that we'll come up with a list of principles. And then those things will have to be worked out in detail, just like our trade agreements are. We have framework agreements, and then you have more detailed executional, documents that follow. So that's kind of where we are. But I think that, in some ways, maybe it is easier to come up with principles, but then you have this whole pathway where things can go terribly, terribly wrong.
And
I
you're
have a
so tied to
somewhat,
watching the price of oil in the stock market
Yeah.
that puts certain pressure on what's happening every day, every hour.
let me just get in on this for one quick second because I have a slightly different take on this. I think that there's 5 people showing up in Islamabad on the U.S. side because that's the way the president operates. I mean, the Gulf states like the Trump administration because Gulf leaders believe that the president runs the United States in the same way they run their countries. 5 people on WhatsApp, and that's what's happening. The president sits in the Oval Office, Stephen Miller, Susie Wiles, sometimes the vice president, Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, and I don't know, trade someone in there for that. And that's it. And he listens to his
You left out
tells
Rubio.
them what to do. I mean, JD Vance called the president 6 or 7 times from
Yeah,
Islamabad. This is 5 people on
exactly. No,
WhatsApp.
and I don't disagree with that at all. I
I
think
mean,
that that's
yes. I
completely
mean,
fair. I do think they
all of
were
what Beth was saying, they
phoning
have
home.
disdain for expertise. They don't like the foreign policy process. All of those things are true, but the president doesn't do those things. He
Exactly.
relies on basically 5 people, and that's it.
Let me bring in one of our listeners, Paul Watler from Dallas. He asked, was Netanyahu planning all along to attack Hezbollah once the U.S. joined the attack on Iran? Did he share that with the president, or was this another example of underestimating the enemy, this time by by Prime Minister Netanyahu?
I'll take the first that. Let me just say that Hezbollah attacked Israel on
Yeah.
March 1. In response to the killing of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Just like October 7th, the Israelis would not have engaged with Hezbollah had Hezbollah not started lobbing rockets and missiles at Israel on October 8th. I think the Israelis would like to resolve their Hezbollah problem, and that's what this. But Hezbollah gave them the opportunity by attacking them, which is what I think a significant number of Lebanese are upset about, is that they invited the Israelis to come in and wreak a lot of havoc in Lebanon because Hezbollah attacked Israel.
Stephen, you'll like
I
this. Oh, go ahead, Beth.
I was just going to add to that, and please correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, but I think that to the listener's question, while Hezbollah is the one that started this round, I think that the Israelis were surprised that that Hezbollah joined in. I don't think that they expected that. And I think that that's part of the miscalculation. Netanyahu miscalculated about Hamas, thinking that he could buy them off and that somehow giving them money and power would remove their revolutionary and destruction mentality, their terrorist mentality. And I think that I think that Israel thought that they destroyed enough of Hezbollah that they would not commit suicide.
I agree with that the Israelis overestimated how much damage they had done to Hezbollah, or did not anticipate this slapback right now. The irony, though, becomes that as long as Israel's in southern Lebanon and destroying villages, it creates a real problem for Lebanese who do want, would that they had an army that was capable of controlling Hezbollah, because I think in an ideal world, the Lebanese leadership could give assurances to Israel that Hezbollah was not going to continue to be able to attack them from Lebanon. The problem is that, and again, this is from friends of mine who are not Muslims, are not Shia. They cannot stand Israel taking hold of territory, of Lebanese territory, and staying there. I mean, this is what's gone back and forth, and since 1982 has caused problems. I mean, it was kind of the origins of Hezbollah, in 1982 came from this kind of tit for tat where Israel's in Lebanon.
I think there's a range of views about this in Lebanon, as there are in every place.
Yes.
I think, there isn't total agreement among any of the communities on this stuff. I think that the Israelis were surprised. I agree with Beth on that, but I also think that they had a fairly good understanding that Hezbollah was rearming. I mean, they had continued military operations over the course of the year in the Bekaa Valley in the south, and had been jumping up and down and screaming that the Lebanese government was not disarming Hezbollah. And of course, they knew about the $1 billion that Iran was funneling to Hezbollah in that period. The UN insisted it was for reconstruction, but it was clearly for drones and rockets that have, in the last 6 weeks, fallen on Israeli communities.
And to add to that, just the last thing on this point, I don't know if anybody wants to disagree with this, but the idea that the IDF then could solve this militarily, I think, is the kind of the final misunderstanding,
yes.
Right? We're making the same mistake.
Well, now we're getting into the psychology of post-October 7th Israel, in which the Israelis don't look at managing their security threats as inferior to trying to resolve them, because in them trying to manage them, they got things like October 7th.
Yeah.
Right.
You talk about the psychology. How much does I keep saying Prime Minister Netanyahu's legal problems, desire to stay in power, play into this?
Oh, I got to be honest with you. I mean, he has engaged in strenuous efforts to maintain his coalition, and has been successful in doing that. I think part of it is the fact that his coalition partners understand that if they had gone to early elections, they wouldn't necessarily return to government, or even the Knesset in some cases. I mean, Bezalel Smotrich might not even make it over the threshold to get in there. But keep in mind also that Netanyahu has, since 1996, portrayed himself. Now there's an astonishing irony at the heart of this because of October 7th, but it's Mr. Security, and that, he was the one who was going to face up to Iran and its proxies and so on and so forth. So certainly, he wants to save his skin, but I also think he sees himself in this kind of Churchillian way. Who's his, political hero. So I'm not sure how much the corruption trial has played into it. And of course, this thing has gone on forever and ever and ever. And who knows? So it wasn't like it was at a crucial moment and you need to distract people from it. It's been going on for years.
Let me combine these two questions, one from Frankie and the other one from Barton. Do you think that a group of nations will eventually administer the Strait of Hormuz? And if so, would it be possible that Iran would be excluded? And then from Barton, considering how significant the strait is, how much control can Iran exert over it? And why hasn't the U.S., in partnership with the Gulf states, made efforts to find another channel within the region? Not sure how that would work, but
the geography militates against finding another channel in the region unless you're going to dig a Panama Canal about 5 times as long and wide down. That won't happen. I think Iran has to be part of any solution. Look, this is the single biggest thing that needs to be dealt with now. And ideally, we return to status quo ante, which is that, the U.S. believes in free navigation. We believe in this everywhere. We try to support this. the physical nature of the strait is such that, 24 miles wide at the widest point, and what is law of the sea say in terms of control zones? So, but between Oman and Iran, they actually have some kind of control internationally, but allowing for freedom of navigation. I think some monitoring. I really don't know how we get out of this now, but some sort of monitoring regime. But Iran does have to be part of that monitoring regime. All of their stuff goes out. And we have to set in place something to ensure for our allies as well, for our friends in the Gulf, that, and as well as the Asian countries that have some chops in this now, or should, even though they didn't start it, they're feeling the results in hugely painful ways. That we can come to some kind of formulation that is going to take more expertise than we have going to Pakistan right now, in my humble opinion, or my not so humble opinion. But because you really need people who understand how those laws work, and there has to be something, unfortunately, that is face saving on both sides too. Whether we like it or not, Iran did not start this conflict right now. The stuff was flowing and going through, and that's to their benefit as well. They cannot eat.
And they probably didn't appreciate the control that they had.
Well, I think that it puts them in a terrible spot too. But they can't drink oil. They can't cook with it, with that kind of oil. They have to sell it. Everyone has to sell it to get it going. And so it's in everyone's interest to find some solution to this. I don't think the American taxpayer wants to have some kind of military, hugely expensive, and it would be, regime set up in the Strait of Hormuz to make sure that everything goes through. That is just an incredibly, for those of us who remember the reflagging even of just the Kuwaiti ships back in, during the war. That is that takes up enormous resources, and in this day and age, it just doesn't, it's not a viable solution.
Let me bring in one of our forum listeners who says, if Iran's Navy has been destroyed, how can it continue to control the Strait of Hormuz?
Well,
has it been destroyed?
Well, it hasn't I think it can threaten. Look, I don't know how many people remember the USS Cole in 1998 that was a naval frigate. I guess it was a frigate. I'm trying to remember what the nature of the boat was.
It was in Yemen, wasn't it?
But it was in Yemen,
yeah.
And it was hit by a small, not even a Boston whaler, but a small boat
almost
filled with
raft.
Semtex.
Yeah.
And if you have people who are prepared to do suicide attacks like that or something else, all it takes is one boat going, one ship going, one fuel tanker. Insurance goes off the charts. People don't want to pay for it. People don't want to put stuff through. It's really would change the whole. Iran does have a capacity to threaten, but again, if you put mines again in the water, which they did previously during the Iran-Iraq War, that becomes their problem as well too, as everybody else's. It becomes hugely expensive. It stops the flow of energy, of hydrocarbons, and I just hope they find some clever way to negotiate this out.
Stephen, you'll like this. They know about your expertise with Turkey. What role could or has Turkey played?
Generally a marginal role. I just do want to go back to the reflagging of Kuwaiti tankers back in 1987, 1988. Mm-hmm. Just I love this point that operation, along with a number of military operations that came along with it, was the largest U.S. naval operation since World War II. That gives you a sense of how involved this actually is to do this kind of stuff. But it boggles the mind that this wasn't the first thing we thought about when the president went to war. But knowing who he is and him thinking that he'd find his Persian Delcy Rodriguez, it doesn't actually surprise me.
Well, and who his Secretary of War is.
Right. And I'm not surprised, but I am shocked. Anyway, Turkey hasn't played a major role here at all. They have been part of this kind of notional mediation. They've met with the Egyptians, the Pakistanis, and the Saudis. But in general, this has been a Pakistani show. The Turks and Pakistanis have a very close relationship. But still, the Turks haven't been particularly helpful here because they don't really have the goods with the Iranians to play that kind of role. And when it comes to the Lebanese front, they've burnt absolutely every bridge they have with the Israelis. So they can't really be a mediator if they can't speak to both sides.
Beth, talk about how difficult it would be for us to obtain the enriched uranium. I was listening this morning to David McCloskey's wonderful podcast, The Rest is Classified. And he said that about 900 pounds or so of the enriched uranium could probably fit in a small pickup or about 20 scuba diving tanks, but that it would truly take thousands of people to go and get it. How difficult of an operation would that be to secure or obtain the enriched uranium?
I think it's pretty huge. And, you can't drive a pickup truck out of Iran.
No.
So I think
No, he was
that
just saying that how
probably,
large it was, that
yeah,
it really, yeah.
and my understanding is that it would take multiple Chinook helicopters, kind of cargo helicopters to take something like that out. 60 Minutes had a good piece on that last night. I think it's enormous, right? Because if any of the radioactive dust, as President Trump says, the reason he says that is because 60% rich uranium is uranium oxide, which is a heavy ceramic powder. And if any of those canisters were damaged in some way, perhaps maybe he was told that powder could have been dispersed. So there's some risk that the area that you would be going into in these tunnels would have contamination. So you've got to dig down, and it's extremely deep. I mean, it's not like going to your basement, right? It's like going into, I don't know, an Empire State Building kind of, there's a lot of basement, and you'd have to get all that out. You'd have to move all that rubble. That would take weeks, perhaps, to do that. So here are the other things I want to mention here is that, first, that we always talk about the 60% uranium. I use kilograms because that's just how I do it, 440 kilograms or so. But there's also 200 kilograms of 20% enriched uranium.
2,000.
And I'll remind our listeners that JCPOA, the limit was 3.6, whatever it is, percent. I'm terrible with numbers, but it was under 5. And then there's another, I don't know, 6,000 kilograms of 5% enriched uranium. So there's a lot of uranium. Okay. And then, we haven't had access to the centrifuges to be able to be counting the number of centrifuges that have been built over time since since 2020. Right. So we actually don't know how many centrifuges they have or where they are. And the IAEA, I guess a couple of months ago came out with a report saying that there was a second hall under Esfahan. We don't know really what was there. We don't know what's in this other facility in Pickaxe Mountain, whether that's some kind of production facility or whether that's enrichment or what's going on there. But everybody suspected over many, many decades that Iran had a covert program, and that was proven by the Israelis a long time ago. And that was ended, I believe, those reports, that it was ended by the Supreme Leader. But nonetheless, there were aspects of the program that were continuing. And we always talk about the uranium, but we don't talk about the weaponization. And for listeners, there are two parts to making a bomb. One is you need the fissile material, the enriched uranium, to 90%, and it's a very short jump because it's exponential in the centrifuges between 60 and 90. But you also need to figure out how to make a bomb out of that. And we know that the Iranians had figured out how to produce uranium metal. And the reason uranium metal matters is because that's the core for a bomb. And so now we know that they moved forward on some aspects of weaponization. And 2 years ago, the intelligence community stopped saying in their unclassified statement, a sentence about how we used to say that we were verifying that we weren't seeing any research or activities that were supporting the weaponization part of the program.
Right.
And we stopped saying that. So I think that what I really want people to understand about the whole thing with Iran's nuclear program is that, this is not your uh, kids or whatever, your grandfathers, your father's nuclear weapons program of 2015. In the last decade, we're talking about an entirely different set of capabilities, centrifuges that have taken many, many generations of leaps. And so we can't just go back and do the same deal. We've got to actually think about how do we prevent Iran over time. Now, it's not an emergency, right? Because we did wipe out almost, a lot of what's happening. So it's not an emergency. This isn't going to happen tomorrow, but how many other times are we going to have an opportunity to actually do a deal?
Right.
And so I really feel like we do need to pay attention to this. And then there are really serious complications about, can you even do sanctions relief if you don't get a good deal, because you have to have Congress approved, you have to have the UN approved, you have to have the EU approved. It's complicated.
And you also have the question of reparations as well as sanctions relief that they're asking for.
Lots of things they're asking for.
We have several questions about China. What is China's interest? What role are they playing? And also one where do you think, although they've denied it, that they've been providing intelligence to Iran? Who wants to? Beth, we'll let you go with that.
I'm sorry, because I just talked like forever on Iran nuclear program, which I could like literally spend hours
Right.
on.
No, this was really helpful.
So sorry
Thank you.
about that. But so China is, I do believe the reports that China pushes up to the line of supporting Iran. They don't do it for free. They get things for it. But I think that they have provided some kind of, satellite support, and
Yeah.
they're absolutely providing the components for Iran's ballistic missile system. Like, we've been tracking this sodium perchlorate that has been shipped from China to Iran. Yes, these are commercial relationships, but no problem on the Chinese side. They provide all sorts of electronics and other kinds of components for their weapon systems. So, I don't think that they did what Russia did, which is providing tactics and providing, tracking of U.S. Forces to help the Iranians target Americans. That's what the Russians did. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if in the postmortem we find out, I could be wrong, this is a complete guess, but those six people, those six brave Americans who died in Kuwait in a base that was not normally occupied. They moved into it. It was a very flimsy kind of situation. They just moved there. I think that maybe the targeting from Russia helped kill those brave Americans. I don't know. But that's the sort of thing that Russia was trying to do. For China, there are limits to how far they'll go because they don't want to be caught. They want stability with America. They don't want to be entangled in wars like we are. They look at us and they're like, you people are crazy. And, they don't have real alliances like we do or we used to. So, it's a whole different ball game, but they have a very satisfying transactional relationship with Iran that they want to continue.
And what about Russia? Stephen, could you take that one?
Well, I think Beth said it. The Russians, this is clearly payback for American support for Ukraine. We have provided the Ukrainians with targeting information and all kinds of things along those lines. And the Russians were going to do the same. So, but beyond that, I don't see the United States really responding to that. I mean, it's sort of a tit for tat, and I don't see neighbors even responding or impacting their view of Russia. I think the interesting part of this story is the Chinese, and I think that it's clear that the Chinese have been providing assistance to Iran. It's clear that, though, at the same time, that the Chinese do not want to replace the United States as the provider of security and stability in the region. They would like for us to be bogged down in the region. And it's one of the reasons why they're supplying equipment and the means to bog the United States down to the Iranians. So I think that it is important to understand that to the extent that the United States is in the Gulf, we have less time and attention for what's going on in East Asia. So I think that's the state of play with the other major powers.
Both on the forum and on WorldNow, we recently had Jim Lindsay from Council on Foreign Relations on the program talking about the best and worst foreign policy decisions. Now, that ended in 2020. That's as far as their survey went. How do you think future historians and political scientists might look at this?
Historically minded political scientists.
Yeah.
I would rank. I mean, I'm sorry, I stepped on whoever you were going to ask the question.
No, go ahead.
No,
Go
I want to hear
Steve.
from all three of you.
Yeah.
I would put it up there with them. I joke that the one guy in the Trump administration who read my book, in which I specifically said that I thought that the JCPOA was flawed. In that the central hunch at the center, the hunch at the center of it was that the Iranians wanted a better relationship with the United States, and that wasn't going to happen. And the military option was a real problem because it would provide actually a lifeline to a dying regime. Was a bad idea, and guess what? It's proven to be a very bad idea. It is likely it's likely that the United States will come out of this conflict worse off than it was on February 27th, where the Iranians have some measure of control over the Strait of Hormuz, where the Iranians are being paid for that, where sanctions relief is something that they require in order to play ball. None of those things existed prior to February 28th. They did not have control over the Strait of Hormuz. The United States was ensuring freedom of navigation. They didn't have sanctions relief. We've put the Iranians in a stronger position than they were because the president believed that this would be something that was very easy. So I think it'll rank up there.
Ambassador, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I agree. I mean, I think this is, previously I had said the invasion of Iraq was the worst decision of the 21st century, and now I think that, we'll have to wait and see, but this is right up there, if not even more so. I'm not sure. Iraq, because it also changed, it's in a way, it's related to this, too, because it destabilized the region and it gave Iran inroads. I personally, I don't think as long as the U.S.-Israeli relationship is as mutually supportive as it is, Iran is not going to be friends with the United States. I think that's just a simple, realization on that. I don't think, unless we have a real overturn of everything. But yeah, no, this is right up there. This is a stinker. It's big time.
I would just add to that, in McNamara's book, In Retrospect, it's called, his memoir about the Vietnam War, one of the lessons learned he talks about is that some problems can't be solved.
Right.
Some problems can only be managed.
Correct.
I think that we might have, figured out a way of managing this problem better because President Trump is willing to use and threaten force, but that takes a strategy that is, complex and long-term, strategic, and that's not what we had here. And that, I think, this kind of precipitous action, while none of us here thinks that Iran is a country that should be run by the people who run it, and regime change, in my view, is the only way we're going to have peace and stability in the Middle East.
Well, let's hope that happens. And I hate to cut you off, but we're running out of time. Thank you so much. We are approaching the top of the hour. My thanks to our three guests, Beth Sanders, Stephen Cook, and Ambassador Deborah Jones, for sharing such valuable insights. I think we all benefit. Perhaps we all would agree it might be good if they were at the negotiating table in Islamabad. I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us from across the country. Thank you for supporting community radio and your local World Affairs Council. The forum returns next Monday at our regular time, 6 p.m. Mountain, streaming live at ksfr.org. I'm Jim Falk. Have a good evening.